A janitor who never made more than minimum wage died and left behind an $8 million fortune. A Harvard-educated Wall Street executive worth millions went completely broke and had to borrow money from friends just to get by. Same country, same financial system, same access to banks, markets, and information. So what actually separates these two people? It's not intelligence. The janitor never took a single finance class. It's not luck or income or even how much money passed through their hands over a lifetime. It's something much stranger and honestly much more human. And the moment you understand it, you'll never look at money the same way again. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that janitor understood that the Wall Street executive didn't. And idea number 5 is the one that quietly wrecks more people's finances than any market crash ever could. This is the story behind The Psychology of Money, written by Morgan Housel, a former financial writer at the Wall Street Journal and one of the most read voices on money and human behavior alive today. Here's what makes this book different from basically every other finance book out there. Housel barely talks about spreadsheets, stock picks, or interest rates. Instead, he asks a much more interesting question: why do smart people make such bad decisions with money over and over again? His answer, after years of studying real financial behavior, is this: managing money well has surprisingly little to do with how smart you are. It has everything to do with how you behave, especially when things get emotional, uncertain, or scary. That janitor from The Hook? His name was Ronald Red. He quietly invested small amounts into solid companies for decades, never touched it, never panicked, and let time do the work. The Wall Street executive who went broke had far more financial knowledge, but he also had ego, impatience, and a taste for risk that eventually caught up with him. Same world. Two completely different relationships with money. And that gap is exactly what this book unpacks. Let's start with the story that, according to Housel, changes how you should think about every financial decision you'll ever make. Idea 1: your money decisions make perfect sense to you. Here's something most finance experts get wrong. They assume people make bad money choices because they're irrational or uninformed. Housel argues something different. Everyone's financial decisions make complete sense, based on the unique story their life has taught them. Think about someone who grew up during a time of stable jobs and steady markets. To them, investing feels safe and predictable. Now think about someone who grew up watching their parents lose everything in a financial collapse. To that person, keeping cash under the mattress isn't irrational. It's the most logical response to what they've personally witnessed. Same financial decision, completely different life experience creating it. This matters because it explains why your coworker's investing strategy might look reckless to you, while yours looks overly cautious to them. Neither of you is wrong. You're both reacting to different chapters of your own personal history. Once you accept that money decisions are deeply personal, not just mathematical, a much bigger question opens up. If everyone's playing their own version of the game, why do so many people still end up losing at it? The answer starts with something almost nobody accounts for: luck. Idea 2: luck and risk are identical twins wearing different masks. Here's an uncomfortable truth Housel dives into. The line between genius investment and reckless gamble is thinner than anyone wants to admit. And often, luck is the only thing separating the two. Picture two friends who both put their savings into a risky new company. One company happens to succeed wildly, and that friend gets called a visionary. The other company collapses, and that friend gets called foolish. But here's the twist: both friends took the exact same risk with the exact same reasoning at the exact same moment. The only difference in outcome? Circumstances completely outside their control. This is why copying the exact moves of a famous billionaire investor is far riskier than people think. You can copy their strategy, but you can't copy the luck, timing, or specific conditions that made it pay off for them. Why does this matter so much? Because if you only study success stories and ignore the role of luck, you'll take on way more risk than you realize, chasing outcomes that were never guaranteed to repeat. So if luck plays such a massive role, does that mean effort and patience don't matter? Not even close. In fact, the next idea is about the one financial ingredient that has nothing to do with luck at all, and it might be the most powerful force in this entire book. Idea 3. Compounding doesn't reward speed, it rewards patience. Warren Buffett is worth an almost unbelievable amount of money. Most people assume this happened because he found some secret formula for picking stocks. But Housel points out something wild. The vast majority of Buffett's fortune was built after he turned 50, simply because he started investing as a child and never stopped. It wasn't really his investing skill that made him a legend. It was his time horizon. Here's a simple way to picture it. Imagine rolling a snowball down a hill. A small snowball rolled down a short hill barely grows. But that same small snowball rolled down an enormously long hill ends up massive. Not because it started big, but because it had so much distance to keep gathering more snow. Money works the same way. A modest amount invested consistently over 40 years can outperform a much larger amount invested aggressively for just 10. Simply because compounding needs time far more than it needs size. This is why Housel argues that the real secret to building wealth isn't finding the perfect investment. It's surviving long enough and staying consistent enough for compounding to quietly do the heavy lifting. But staying consistent for decades is easier said than done, especially when life keeps throwing curveballs at your plans. Which brings us to a concept that might be the single most practical idea in the whole book. Idea 4, the room for being wrong. Here's a question worth sitting with. Why do so many financially successful people still go broke? Housel's answer is that they didn't leave themselves any margin for error. They built their financial life assuming everything would go exactly as planned, and when life inevitably didn't cooperate, they had no cushion left to absorb the shock. Think about someone who takes on a mortgage, a car loan, and a lifestyle that perfectly matches their current salary, down to the last dollar. It works fine, right up until they lose their job, face a medical bill, or the market dips. Suddenly, perfectly planned becomes completely unraveled, because there was zero room for anything to go wrong. Now picture someone else with a similar income who deliberately spends and borrows less than they could. It might look inefficient on paper, but when life throws a curveball, and it always does, they absorb it and keep moving while others get wiped out entirely. This margin, this cushion, this buffer, Housel calls it room for error, and he argues it's not a sign of weak planning. It's actually the smartest form of planning there is, because it accounts for the one guarantee in life: things rarely go exactly as expected. Which leads us into a truth that might be the most emotionally freeing idea in this entire book. Idea 5, nobody's crazy, but comparison will wreck you anyway. Here it is, the idea we teased at the very start. Housel points out a strange trap. The goalposts for enough money keep moving, because we don't measure our progress against our own past, we measure it against other people. Picture someone who earns a great income, more than enough to live comfortably. But they work alongside someone who earns even more, drives a nicer car, and takes flashier vacations. Suddenly, more than enough starts to feel like not enough at all. Not because their actual life changed, but because their comparison point did. This is exactly what happened to that Wall Street executive from the very beginning of this video. He didn't go broke because he lacked money. He went broke chasing a lifestyle that matched people richer than him, taking on bigger risks and bigger debts to keep up, until the whole thing collapsed. Meanwhile, Ronald Redd, the janitor, never compared himself to Wall Street. He simply lived below what he earned, invested the difference, and let decades of patience quietly build a fortune nobody expected. This is why Housel insists that the hardest part of personal finance isn't math. It's knowing when you have enough, and having the discipline to stop moving your own goalposts just because someone else's goalposts moved. So now that we've walked through mindset, luck, patience, margin, and comparison, what do you actually do with all of it? Key takeaways. Let's lock in the biggest lessons from this book. 1. Your money habits make sense to you, shaped by your own unique experiences, not just cold logic. Understanding this builds patience with yourself and others. 2. Luck and risk are always intertwined. Study the full picture behind success stories, not just the highlight reel. 3. Compounding rewards time far more than genius. Consistency over decades beats brilliance over a few years. 4. Always leave room for error. Life rarely goes exactly to plan, so your finances shouldn't assume it will. 5. Define enough for yourself. Chasing someone else's version of wealth is a race that never actually ends. None of these ideas require a finance degree, a huge salary, or perfect timing. They require patience, self-awareness, and the discipline to play your own game, not someone else's. Here's what makes this story so powerful. Ronald Read wasn't a genius. He wasn't lucky in some magical way. He simply understood something that took the Wall Street executive an entire collapse to learn. That wealth isn't about how much you make, how smart you are, or how impressive your life looks to other people. It's about behavior, patience, and giving yourself room to be human. That janitor and that executive both had access to the exact same financial world. The only difference was what was going on in their heads, which means the biggest variable in your own financial future isn't the market, the economy, or even your income. It's you, your habits, your patience, and your relationship with comparison. If this video changed how you think about money, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Subscribe if you want more life-changing books broken down like this, in plain, simple language with zero fluff. And drop a comment below telling me, what book should I break down next? Because the next story might just rewire the way you think about money all over again.